Hello, this is ASEAN Movie Pulse Talks number 6. I'm here with Rouven Linnarz, co-administrator of ASEAN Movie Pulse, and Tom Wilmot, one of the newest additions to the website. Today we decided to speak about a movie that maybe will make us feel a bit better about what we're experiencing now, because what those people experienced was much worse. So we are going to speak about Black Rain by Imamura, a 1989 film, which, okay, let us begin with like a trivia that we were just discussing. So Tom, Takashi Miike was involved in the production, was assistant director and also appeared in the film.
Yeah, so he has a very brief sort of cameo appearance in the film. I believe it is when the sort of semi-main character Shigematsu turns up to his work factory, and there's a young man with glasses who sort of greets them as they're joining in, sort of small round spectacles, and that is Takashi Miike. And I think Rouven, you and I were just saying. Miike thinks that he was chosen to appear in that particular part of the movie because he was quite sickly looking. Imamura thought it might have been appropriate, or at least that's his own speculation on it, which is more than amusing. So,
okay. All right. So, and after this trivia, Rouven, can you tell us a bit about what the movie is about?
Yes, I try to stay away from spoilers as much as possible. Black Rain is a movie from 1989, directed by Shohei Imamura, as we just said, and based on a novel by a Japanese writer by the name of Masushi Ibuse from 1966, and it deals with a family. Yasuko is a woman who grows up with her aunt and her uncle, who live on the outskirts of Hiroshima, if I'm not mistaken. And on the August of 1945, a day everyone will remember, not just the Japanese, the atom bombs strike Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And while all of the family members survive, they have been more or less affected by the radiation and the fallout after the atomic bombing. Yasuko is actually not in town; it's actually outside on the ocean, if I'm not mistaken, on a fisher boat, and she is. While she is still very far away, she's nevertheless covered by the fallout or the Black Rain, hence the title Black Rain. They survive the atomic bombing and they resettle in another small village. And we fast forward 5 years later, in the year 1950, Yasuko is in 25 years old, if I'm not mistaken, which is the age when young girls, especially young Japanese girls, should get married, and the aunt and the uncle are trying their best to search for a husband. Since she is the only heir to whatever property they have, it would be an ideal match for any husband. But given the stigma of the Black Rain and the radiation, everybody stays away from the family as much as possible, and all attempts to find a husband for her are unsuccessful. So far, so good.
Okay, one more note on that. The Black Rain that fell after the nuclear bombing, actually, the Black Rain fell mostly in the areas that were a bit further away from the actual explosion. So the people there actually had, apart from the prejudice that they have to face, they were also not considered victims, like in a legal term, as much as the people who were closer to the bombing. In essence, actually, they were recognized as victims just last year, and there were still 84 plaintiffs that were asking to get medical attention for free from the state for what happened during the explosion, and they just managed to get it last year. So I guess this is kind of, okay, obviously it's not weighed in so much in the movie, but we can actually see the prejudice that these people suffered because a lot of the people around them consider them just being lazy for not working. There is a scene in the movie that we actually see that. Okay, so to begin with, I think probably the most shocking scene in the movie is the initial one, right? Right after the bomb fell. I think this is one of the most shocking presentations of what actually happened after the nuclear bomb fell in the area. Tom, what do you think? The first scene?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of takes you aback a little bit as well, just sort of how graphic it is, and you know, there's very heavy imagery. You know, I mean, we're talking about sort of like babies and horrifically burned victims, people who have been blinded. I mean, particularly there's some very shocking shots of just rivers with bodies literally floating down them, and it just seems to be like this endless sort of hellscape almost that Shigematsu and Yasuko are sort of walking through in the aftermath of the bomb. It's sort of relentless, and it only escalates in how graphic it is and just how shocking it is as the sort of flashbacks to the event go on in the film. I don't know how you guys felt about it.
I think what makes this even more visceral is the fact, I mean, we haven't said this, but this is a black and white film. Yeah. And these images in black and white, they seem more visceral, more brutal, as you just described it, Tom, without the use of color, which I find is quite interesting. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was going to say that on that note, they're also sort of timeless in that fashion, because you can sort of tell that some of the effects for like the burn victims and stuff, just some of the practical effects and makeup and stuff, had it been shot in color, you might be able to see some of the imperfections in it and sort of point out that it might look a little bit dated, or, you know, but the fact that it's in black and white, you can't really tell. And it just sort of, again, it adds to that. You kind of have to use your imagination a bit to picture sort of like the blood or the scarring, or, you know.
It actually feels more like you're watching archival footage of the events of that day. It's like a semi-documentary approach, if you want to call it that, which distinctly separates this part of the story from the rest of the story when it's 5 years later and they're in the village, which seems more like a family drama in the same vein as, for example, Yasuhiro Ozu.
No, and I do think we should touch on that at some point as well, just the sort of Ozuian influence to some extent on the film.
Yeah, also I would like to say that what also makes it documentary-like is how realistic it is. It's not over-dramatized or anything. He actually shows what happened, that the people were stupefied mostly because they didn't know what happened. This is the first time this bombing came to anywhere, and they were the first victims of it, and they are actually... they don't know what is happening at all. They just saw, okay, a bomb falling on them and people die and buildings collapsing, but they don't know what is happening, particularly the ones that were a bit further away. And this thing, I think Imamura managed to capture it in the best way, like the question of what is happening now. And the fact that he avoided making it too dramatic, I think it was a great choice, because the events stop by themselves, no need for any extra dramatization.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, like Imamura's sort of documentarian background shows through in this, I feel, quite strongly, just in the way that he presents the event sort of very matter-of-factly. I mean, it's exactly like you said, it does almost look like documentary or archival footage in some respects, and I think that's just credit to his lensing of it and, you know, how he wanted to present it. And I do think as well, like you say, that they're walking through, people look kind of stupefied and stuff, and I think that adds a lot to kind of like the sadness of the film, because we know sort of in hindsight and knowing it as a historical event that these people are walking through a horrifically irradiated area, and that they're essentially already dead. You know, they've already been given a death sentence, but it's, yeah, I just feel like there's a great sadness to that, especially the swathes of people that are doing so.
It reminded me very much of a British television movie called Threads. It was from 1984, and it was a a film made for television, and later on, uh, President Reagan, I think, claimed seeing that film made him aware of the dangers of nuclear power. And it's basically a small town in Great Britain, and they are making a sort of thought experiment. What would happen to how would our threats, our social threats, our connections with other people, how would it affect us and make us vulnerable in a nuclear war? And it starts off with a nuclear bombing of the city and how these people are affected here, and such brutality and such a realism to it. It's a very, very tough film to watch, and I got the same vibe from these opening, I don't know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I think it is.
It's a good chunk. It's a good chunk, and then the flashbacks as well. There's a lot of footage of it.
Okay. We have these flashbacks of what happened right after the bombing, but the main film is actually more of a family drama, since the main problem seems to be how to get Yasuko to get married, which is, I felt this is like a very critical approach to the Japanese society as a whole, like particularly how the women are perceived at the time someone has to marry them, otherwise they are useless. It was something like that. And also, that's the first part that Yasuko experiences, but the second part is the racism of being a victim of the radiation, which seems even worse, like having experienced a bombing, surviving it, and then being labeled as something of no one wants, right? Rouven?
Mm-hmm. I think what we're talking about, and I think this is why the film is separated into these two parts. We are talking about two sets of stigma or two sets of trauma. The first one is the historical trauma that Japanese people live through, the historical trauma of this bombing, being stupefied and not sure what has really hit them. And then we're talking about the trauma or the stigma and the backlash. These people, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Hibakusha? I think it's called the name. Which is the label that Japanese people give these survivors of the atomic bombings. That's a stigma that follows afterwards and creates another trauma, the trauma of being isolated, being neglected in a certain way, and being, let's say, an outcast in this society. What I think is quite interesting, and I read this in the essay by Tom Mess, that the Black Rain as a sort of punishment for Yasuko actually in the end is a sort of key to her freedom, sort of, because she manages to get away from the circle of having to marry after she's 25 or when she's 25, and she's actually free. I mean, not to give away anything more, but the ending for this sort of character is very, very positive, in my opinion.
Tom?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I read the same Tom Mez essay as you, and he does kind of note that it's almost, in a way, for the character of Yasuko, the Black Rain is almost liberating, because whereas in some ways the people's stigma of her of suffering from sort of radiation sickness or potentially suffering from radiation sickness might put her off to more acceptable suitors, it kind of gives her a bit more freedom in terms of, does she want to marry, or can she choose who she wants to marry, rather than falling into a matchmaking, which would have been more common at the time. I think the whole matchmaking plot, which really does kind of take center stage, it shows Imamura's sort of reluctant influence from Yasujiro Ozu you know, like his Noriko trilogy of the late 40s and early 50s, which are all kind of revolving around a character who parents are trying to marry her off, and there's sort of these questions about, you know, whether she wants to or whether she doesn't. There's similar themes here. And Imamura, of course, was assistant director to Ozu during that period in the early 50s. So he's kind of tackling similar themes, but very much in his own way.
Rouven, you want to say something?
I mean, I think the aunt, a character who's not on center stage and has very little to say in comparison to her niece and her husband. But when she says something, it's very much to the point. For example, she tells Yasuko, "Don't get married, you'll die if you do," which works on multiple levels in this context, as a sort of echo of this stigma that the family and Yasuko carries, but also that she has to should utilize this sort of freedom that she now has, and actually venture into making her own life, designing her own life on her own terms.
Mm.
And I think it was also a great choice by Imamura to make Yasuko be rather beautiful, because it also stresses the fact that how beautiful she is and how appealing she would be otherwise, it doesn't matter in this case, because she's considered damaged good, let's say, so it doesn't even matter how beautiful she is. Okay, so on another topic, on another aspect of the movie, I think one of the most important characters is the crazy young man who always, when he hears any kind of machine, runs to put a bomb underneath, because that's how his trauma worked. I think his presence is very dramatic, but at the same time works quite well as kind of a comic relief for a rather bleak film. Tom?
Yeah, I think it's the character of Yuichi that you're discussing, and yeah, I see what you mean. Definitely the first sort of couple of times he appears. I mean, obviously it's whenever a bus is coming into town or someone with their car or with a bike, and he hears the engine, and it takes him back to when he was in the war and having to deal with enemy tanks. And he just feels the need to kind of attack it. He can't really control it. The first couple of times he appears and it happens, it is sort of a comic relief. Like there is a comic element to it, especially the scene where they're all crawling away back towards his house. Like they've sort of tricked Yuichi into thinking that he's attacking the enemy somewhere else just to get him away from the car. But I mean, later on, he has a fantastic sort of monologue sequence, which is beautifully shot. I mean, there's kind of like a spotlight on him and he's sort of reenacting, and it's very intense. Watching it again, like watching those scenes back, they're very sad in their own way, because we're talking about, you know, the effects. The film is mostly surrounded the effects of people who are suffering from radiation sickness and the effects of the bomb, but it is also touching just on the general PTSD, and you can kind of see how he's not really understood fully within the community as well. Even Shigematsu, Yasuko's father, you know, who himself would know what the radiation discrimination sort of towards he and his family, he's not even really fully understanding of Yuichi. So it does show that there's this misunderstanding of the effects of the war in some cases in this early post-war period in Japan.
Rouven?
To be honest, when you just mentioned the character name, I just remembered him. I was completely. I mean, I've seen him and I've noticed him, but I had completely forgotten about him. To be honest, I think when I saw him the first time, I had the same reaction as Tom just described. I just imagined or think that he was a much needed comic relief after the misery, the pain, and the suffering that you have seen for the most part of the film, and which you still see pretty much in the remainder of the film. At the same time, when you see this action repeated over and over again. Like Tom said, whenever there's a bus coming, he thinks there's a tank coming and he has to attack it, or he has to run and cover. It's a sort of, it's very sad. It reminded me of these images of war veterans who are talking about having visions of the war, having nightmares of the war, and still waking up, drenched in sweat and in tears, remembering what has happened.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a remarkable character in a way. You think that he's a comic relief, but giving this monologue that Tom just reminded me of, you actually see him in a very different light. And much like Yasuko, and her uncle, you actually see him for what a remarkable character he is in trying to deal with something that no one of us can understand how to deal with it. At least I can't.
Yeah, I don't think it would be too sort of spoilery to say anyway that Yuichi and Yasuko have some interactions throughout the film, and I think it's quite touching actually, the fact that they develop some kind of kinship with one another, just in the sense that they're both kind of outcasts in a way in this post-war society, or misunderstood in this post-war society. And definitely for Yuichi later in the film, it definitely paints him in a more sympathetic light, which when you think back to those earlier instances where he's come running out of his house when he's sick and he's diving under a car and people don't know what's going on, it's not as funny thinking back on it later on. But I think he's a wonderful character. And I think Kisuke Ishida, who plays him, I hope I pronounced that correctly, I think he's marvelous in the film. He really is.
Yeah,
yeah, I agree also. And also his presence gives another element about Japanese society, because when his mother, Yasuko cannot find anyone to marry her, and the whole family has fallen into despair. But when his mother comes to her house to propose that he becomes her husband, her uncle seems like, no, he's like too low for my daughter, for my niece, who nobody wants, but I'm not very keen to give her to him because he's of a lower caste, let's say.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, it's one of the main points of the film, how layered Japanese society is. Like the hierarchy is rather evident in all aspects of life. You can see it all over the place. Even with Yasuko's uncle, if you remember, there is a scene where he goes and he goes to visit the manager of the factory he used to work. And although there is no factory present anymore, it's completely destroyed, the manager is still his boss because he's on a higher level of hierarchy. He can tell him what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And also I wanted to say another thing. What is great about this film is how Imamura manages to portray the whole of the Japanese society in such a small setting. Like I feel like every character in the film mirrors a part of Japanese society. You have the white collar, the rich, the poor. You also have, if you remember, there is also another woman who comes from the city where he used to work as a hostess, whose status seems to be even lower than everyone, probably.
No.
Yeah. And you also
she's had some issues. Oh, sorry.
He manages to tackle the whole of Japanese society, all aspects. I think it's very impressive what he does in that regard.
Yeah, definitely. The town where they're all sort of living in, the small settlement, is very much a sort of a microcosm of the society at large at a time, because there are people who have been affected by the bomb. There are people, suffering from PTSD, but then there are also people who are kind of judgmental of that. And there's, of course, one of Yasuko's suitors who's very off-putting from the moment he kind of enters the film. He's very forward, and he's very much kind of representing this sort of traditional matchmaking. When he's turns up and he's sort of asking if he can court Yasuko, he very much thinks that he's not kind of entitled to it, but it's just, just how it is. He doesn't really take into consideration the fact that she may not really want to be courted by him.
Yeah. But he seems like almost he's not Japanese, because I think the film kind of makes fun of him, the way that his ways are very direct, that he doesn't follow the tradition so much. This is not how it's supposed to happen, I guess. The film treats him like, I don't know how to say, light-headed, let's say, something not very smart. I felt that way. Okay, Rouven,
Yeah, no,
sorry.
I think what all these three films, I mean, we're talking about Black Rain, Zigen, and The Ballad of Narayama. When you watch them all together, you cannot help but be impressed for what kind of things Imamura does with the period drama. When you think about the period drama, it's always about it seems like it's depicting an era, which is not what it's supposed to do. Actually, and he's very careful in showing the links of for today, like you just said, Panos, that it shows the links of to Japanese society. And with this one, when we talk about stigmas, when we talk about social outcasts, tells you so much about Japanese society. It actually is a lesson about on how to do period drama right. Just a couple of days ago, I watched Fukushima 50. I'm not sure who the director is, but you remember that one, and I don't need to tell you what it is about. You can guess from the name, but this is such a large-scale operation, large-scale blockbuster, and this is a very small-scale family drama, as you said. Just set in this small village, but it tells you so much with every character resembling or can be compared to a instance or a group or a part of Japanese society, and not just of that time, but actually as a reflection of what it is today. And I think that is a marvelous achievement. We're talking about the period drama on the same level as, for example, Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon, to name one example, or Martin Scorsese's Age of Innocence.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's what I think of it.
Oh, it's very high praise indeed. I agree to an extent. I think one of the things that I love so much about the film is not only that it kind of captures that era so well, but I mean, the film even looks like it could have been made in that era. Just the cinematography and the costuming, and even the way it's shot, with a few exceptions, you do kind of get lost in it. You kind of believe that it could have even been made in the, sort of mid to late 50s, which I think is incredible for a film that came out in 1989.
Yeah. Also, there is an element I don't understand. What do you think that the whole concept of the fish in the end and throughout the film signifies? I didn't get that one.
I'm purely speculating, and if I'm wrong, I'm more than happy to be ostracized by anyone in the comments who knows otherwise. I believe that earlier in the film, the carp and the aloe vera plant, they're sort of said to be good for victims of radiation. Like it's kind of it's like healthy for them. Like, it's kind of, that's why they're breeding these carp throughout the film. Shigematsu and his two friends. And obviously, I think you're alluding to the moment at the end where the not at the very end, but towards it, where the carp is sort of jumping out of the lake in front of Yasuko. Yeah. I take it as some kind of clinging on to life in some way, because these characters are sort of facing their own mortality. They're kind of facing the fact that they don't know when this radiation sickness could catch up with them. I see it as Yasuko's kind of joy almost at seeing this carp, whether it's she's actually seeing it or not. I kind of see it as her kind of clinging to some kind of life, some kind of motivation to kind of keep going in a way, because she's obviously quite sick at that point in the film. That's how I see it. I don't know. Maybe it's the complete opposite. Maybe it's a sign that she's near the end. But
Rouven?
I think I'd go in a similar direction and add that I think that's a symbol for example, as Tom said, life in combination with the freedom that she has to a certain extent. She has lived a life. She doesn't have these issues about getting married anymore at that point. So it's a confirmation of this sort of freedom and a sort of innocence, not purity, but innocence, because purity in that context means a different thing. So yeah, I'd say it's a combination of all these. To me, it's a combination of these things: sort of life, the freedom that she enjoys, and possibly even the love that she enjoys. Because when she is becoming sick, she's surrounded by those people that love her very much, and this kind of love that she enjoys. And I think this is also what Tom Messes was talking about in his essay. That is something quite special, which adds a, let's say, positive layer to the ending.
Mm. No, I would highly recommend that people do kind of seek out that Tom Mes essay on the film if they can, because it's a fantastic read. And also, just to very briefly note, I would also recommend that anyone who's watched the film also seek out the alternate ending, which was ripped from the film very close to its release, but it was post-produced some years later, I think, by Imamura's son. It's a color ending sort of set 20 years later, and I won't say anything in terms of spoilers, but it's very interesting to watch. It adds a different flavor to the end of the film.
Okay, I guess that's it. This is a film that we could talk hours for, because we could also touch about the thing with atomic bombing, and if the Americans really needed to drop 2 atomic bombs because they have actually already won. This is an issue that's still being discussed, but okay, I guess that's it for today.
That's a discussion that would take at least a few videos.
A few videos, indeed.
And probably not just film reviewers, but also some historians.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so all 3 films are actually available from Arrow. The Black Rain, Zegian, and the Ballad of Narayama. The alternate ending is there, right, Tom?
Yeah,
it's a wonderful set.
Yeah.
And also just have a look at the artwork. That's for all the movies. That's a quite wonderful design set.
Yes,
as most of the time by Arrow.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess that's it for this time also. Okay, if you like this video, you can also subscribe to our channel. I think we're getting better every time. Now I actually have a proper camera, so who knows what will happen next time.
You're looking better than ever.
But yeah. So from me, Panos, you can say your names and hi. Bye, guys.
Bye.
It was Tom. See you later.
Okay, and see you later. Thank you very much for watching.